we met Ricardo in the spring. Joanna and I did have a little coffee with him. The Union for Concerned Scientists, obviously they're interested in what we're doing here in Kansas, and so they were in town and we appreciated the visit and we got him to come back. The Union of Concerned Scientists works on clean energy, clean vehicles, food and agriculture, global warming, nuclear power and nuclear weapons. For nearly half a century, they have combined the knowledge and influence of a scientific community with the passion of concerned citizens to build a healthy planet first and a safer world. Some of the few results of that work in the recent past, I wanted to read a few. The Union for Concerned Scientists plays a key role in passing landmark emissions and fuel efficiency standards. Let's see, helped win international protections for rainforests that will keep at least 300 million tons of global warming emissions from the atmosphere each year. There were a couple of other really good ones here. UCS introduced a plan to cut projected U.S. oil consumption in half within the next 20 years. And finally, I think this is very important, UCS has launched the Center for Science and Democracy, which is an ambitious initiative dedicated to strengthening the American democracy by restoring the essential role of science and evidence-based decision-making. So I think that's, they're very important to what we do, so we can sort fact from fiction and have reasoned debates in the field that we're working in. We're happy to have Ricardo here also because it's been a very busy week for him. In this weekend's Washington Post, there will be an important article coming out, and it was co-written by Ricardo, along with Mark Bittman, Michael Pollan, and Olivier de Schutter, who is with the United Nations. And they are calling on, it's a 9-point plan that's going to affect how we produce and consume food. So I think Ricardo will talk a little bit about that, but it's a huge weekend for that. Look for it in the Washington Post. And I'm just going to call Ricardo on up. He's the lead scientist for the Food and Environment Program. Am I getting that right? Come on up. Everybody.
Well, thank you very much, Julie, and also all of you for being here this morning. I've got to tell you that when I first saw the date and I saw that it was a Saturday, I said, boy, Saturday in Manhattan, Kansas, I'm not going to have an audience. And I just looked at the schedule last night and I see, well, you're all here. If you were going to go to the game, you would have been gone yesterday. So congratulations on having such a dominant football team this season. It's a great thing to see. And I see I have a few fans in here. All the real fans are down there, I guess. So the other thing I've just got to share with you at the outset is that these kinds of engagements are very difficult because of the fact that people that would come to a meeting like this tend to be the experts in this subject matter. There's actually nothing new you can say to an audience like this, and so it makes it very challenging. And so what I intend to do is actually talk about the future and how we might work together to bring about some aspects, at least, of the shared vision that I've already heard articulated during the run of this meeting. Some of you, actually probably most of you, don't have any idea about my background, but I just want you to know that it doesn't take a whole lot to get me onto the Midwest. I spent about 28 years at Iowa State and about 6 years at the Kellogg Foundation in Michigan. So, you know, almost 3.5 decades out in the Midwest, and it really feels like home whenever I can get out here. And whenever I can be within striking distance of Fred Kirschenman, it's such an honor and a privilege. A while ago, I noticed that there was a hashtag floating around with the name Freducation. And I'm not sure who originated that. I think the first organization that I saw actually using it online was the Women, Food and Agriculture Network out of Iowa. But I could not agree more with that concept of education. So this conference got started off just on the right foot for me because I got an hour of that wonderful education and inspiration. So the topic of the conference is the future of food, or at least the topic that Fred and I were assigned to think about is the future of food. And I'm going to skip the doom part of this because if you were to extrapolate the current directions of the food system, that would be a pretty bleak story. As a matter of fact, Fred did talk a little bit about that, and all of you, as I say, are very familiar with that, so we don't need to talk about that. We're all firmly convinced that there are better ways, that there must be better ways for the food system to go. And so what I would like to do is dwell on that completely. And I think that what we have is a project. We have a national project, and I think we have a discussion within the family. This nation has actually achieved great things in many counts, but the food system that it has achieved through concerted effort over a period of time longer than a decade is a huge achievement. And the question to me for the future is whether we as a species in the United States, as one of the countries that has a responsibility for leading in the food system, are going to have the will and also the resourcefulness to solve two of the key fundamental problems that face the food system and agriculture in general. And that is whether we can solve producing food without exploiting nature and without exploiting people. These are the two key features of the global food system. Now, Fred addressed the exploiting nature aspect. Historically, it has been the case that literally until the last few seconds, if you think in the big picture, humanity has not had the capacity to really affect the global geoplanetary cycles very much. And so it stands to reason then that for us, it does make sense to send things downriver, and that it does make sense that nature can recover whenever it is that we do harm to it. But of course that has changed dramatically with the power that we've developed to influence natural cycles and natural processes within the last few decades, namely within the last century. And the issue of exploiting human beings, this could easily become depressing, and I'm not going to dwell on this unless during question and answer we need to speak about it some more. But anthropologists use that as an actual indicator of when societies begin to develop. And so when you actually see signals of what sociologists and anthropologists would refer to as social stratification and specialization, what that means is that at periods of time dating as long ago as 10,000 years, but also quite recently, up until about 4,000 years ago, humanity learned to intensify food production, but the burden of doing the brutal field work was always laid on a sub-portion of that population. And all the devices that we've used to justify that we brutalize and exploit some section of the population remain with us today. We call them different names than we have in the past, but they remain with us. They're nicely isolated. You know, many of us, unless we're directly included in agricultural production, wouldn't necessarily be aware of that exploitation. But without that exploitation, the system stops, just as surely as it stops if you can't use tractors and combines. It is impossible without human exploitation. And so these are the two things that we must address. So it is the 21st century. We can no longer continue to produce by exploiting nature. That will be its own end, and we cannot continue to produce by exploiting human beings. So that's the question. Are we going to be able to solve that? So having laid that out, let's talk about how we actually accomplish the major feat of the modern global food system, which was the creation of the United States that was exported to the rest of the world. So let's talk about the lessons that we've learned from that. We've reshaped the food system completely once. So based on that experience, can we do that again along completely different principles, now knowing that we can't exploit nature, can't exploit people? So here are the features of that food system. So these days, as exemplified by what most of us did here this morning, we get about half of our food by going out someplace and getting it. And the feature of the food system that accounts for us being able to do that is that for those of us for whom the system works, we are very powerful. We are very rich. You may not feel very rich and powerful sitting there, but let me illustrate just one aspect of how this is true. So when you say that you want to go out, somebody else is actually preparing the meal. Somebody else is bringing it to you. Somebody else is cleaning up after you. All you have to do is sort of say, what am I in the mood for? Will it be Korean? Will it be Japanese? Will it be Mexican? Whatever it is that you want, here in Manhattan, Kansas, you can have within about 5 minutes of thinking about it. I've driven from one end of Manhattan to the other, I can tell you that. So you can think of it, and you can have it. So, and that's here in Manhattan, Kansas. That is tremendous power, and I'll illustrate specifically why that is tremendous power in just a little bit. We'll have to visualize that in order to understand it. The other half of the time, what we're doing is going someplace where there's this massive concentration of maybe 30,000 to 60,000 different articles that we can take home to use to assemble a meal within about 10 to 20 minutes. We wouldn't tolerate it if it took more than 20 minutes. And so the whole system is geared to manufacture the building blocks with which we can assemble a meal quickly at home. So those are the two ways in which we do this. So that means that there is this massive global logistical system that makes it so no matter where we are, no matter what we're in the mood for, whatever it is that we want, we can have it. And as I've said, that actually depends on who we are. That system does not work, is not available to everyone. But for whom it is available, roughly a little bit more than about 1 million or 1 billion people on this planet, essentially the materials, the water, the energy of the planet are flowing from all over the planet to provide whatever it is that you desire, whether it's native to where you are, whether it's in season or not, it doesn't matter. It's in season someplace and somebody's producing it, and if you want it, you can have it. So that's the tremendous power that I'm referring to. Now, you can imagine what it takes to build that complex global logistical system. I'll allude just a little bit to some of the historical factors that went into building that. Now, there's a key thing about this, which is that I'm featuring the power, I'm featuring the logistics of this system. There is something that this system is selling us that isn't explicit when we talk about food. And so I'll come back and draw that out because this is one of the lessons of what we would want to see in a future food system. But let's talk now about what the outcome of this is. And so what I want to do is call your attention to a recent report from Oxfam. Actually, it dates to the beginning of this year. And Oxfam did this report where they took a look at the quality of the global food system and did a comparison by nations. And they took a look at such things as the sufficiency of the food system, the safety of the food system, and so on. You can see all these characteristics up here at the top of the screen. Actually, let's see if I can move around a little bit here. So, let me illustrate to you and point out at the beginning, you'll get the pattern immediately what we're looking at here. So on the left-hand side of the screen, what you see are the countries that scored the best, all the countries of the world. On the right-hand side, you see the opposite. And so these are the overall scores for all of the countries. The color codes are for regions of the world. And so you're looking for the United States, there it is. As you all would predict, the United States would feature over way to the left-hand side of any chart like this. Now, let's break down the components of this per Oxfam's analysis. And so this is sufficiency. Is there enough to eat? So you see that North America, you see that Europe, and the color blue there features strongly among having more than enough to eat. Sufficiency is not a problem for the majority of us. There are 50 million of us in this country for whom that is not true. And that's not an incidental, that's a structural feature of the system. In other words, those are the people that don't have the economic power that the rest of us do. So let's go to the next characteristic here, affordability. And again, as most of you would predict, the United States is just slammed over to the left on this. Now, we won't be able to get into these details, but let me just point out that word affordability is a key thing. It is not to be confused with cheap. So the food is not cheap. Just think about what it takes to get that apple from New Zealand when it's out of season all the way over here. Whether you're going to eat it or not, it's got to be there because you may want it. And if you may want it, it's got to be there. That banana that's coming from Ecuador, it has to be there in case you may want it. As a matter of fact, that's the leading loss leader at grocery stores, you know. If it's not there, you won't go to that grocery store. And so every supermarket makes sure that it's there. So it's got to be there whether you want it or not. And that is extremely expensive to procure. And the difference is that affordability, you know, it's a ratio. You have a numerator, denominator, and if you have a small number, what that means is that either the numerator is teeny, or the denominator is big, or both. So the issue here is that the United States as a country is very wealthy. That's what this is showing you, not that the food is cheap. So it's a very important thing to point out. The next characteristic, again, all of you would predict, is food quality. The United States ranks very well on that. Every once in a while, we actually do get a runaway problem. You know, there is an infection, a bacterial infection, things of this sort. But you can, in general, rely on the safety of the food that you will get when you go to that restaurant or you go to that grocery store. And the last characteristic here is the quality in terms of health, with diabetes and obesity being the key indicators. And here, the United States features with some of the worst countries in the world. So Mexico will be over there, Kuwait would be over there. Some of the least healthy countries in the world. I mean, you know the statistics and we don't need to dwell with them here. Now, there is another study that actually came out at around the same period of time that was done by the Academy of Sciences and the National Research Council with a very telling title, Shorter Lives, Poorer Health. As you may have heard, there was a signal study from the Center for Disease Control recently that documents that we are reversing 100 years of progress in public health where our lifespans increased, and now lifespans are beginning to decrease as a result of the way in which we eat. And the United States ranks at the last of the list that this study looked at, number 17. This is a peculiar number, you may wonder about that, but the reason for that is that's how deep in the list of the countries of the world, the wealthy countries of the world, the Council had to go in order to get to the United States. And so, many of you may be familiar with the writings of Mark Bigman, who among his many strengths is that he can hear somebody speak for 40 minutes and they're saying one sentence. He'll say, oh, what you mean is, and then he says the one sentence. And what he says about this particular one is that, you know, it's really hard to imagine having a food supply that is abundant as ours and doing a worse job with it. So this is one of the lessons. We certainly can do better than this. Now, let's not lose sight. There are magnificent things about this food system. Productivity is unquestionable. There are people in this room that are responsible for some of that productivity. There's a marvel of logistics that makes it so that we can have whatever it is that we want. But here's the outcome, that we're making ourselves sick. And it isn't just that we're making ourselves sick. This is affecting the well-being and the long-term fortunes of this country. We don't have a military force that actually can go into the field, which is actually being affected these days by the quality of our diet. Our children are too ill to be able to do well at their studies. This is going to affect their entire lives. And that's not just them individually. Collectively, this country won't be competitive if we're making ourselves sick because of the way in which we eat. And so, here are the costs. You're familiar with the usual litany. Diabetes, which is a disease that used to be a rare disease, has sextupled since the introduction of industrial agriculture in the 1960s. Its cost now is approximating about a third of the nation's national deficit, $245 billion. The cost of obesity is more than just the dollars. It affects the nation's productivity, as the cost of cardiovascular disease is $444 billion. This is the #1 leading cause of death in the United States, and it's preventable. All of these are preventable. They're all directly related to the way in which we eat. 4 of the leading causes of death in the United States are chronic diseases that are completely preventable, linked to the way in which we eat. So these are some of the stakes. When I talk about human exploitation, you may go immediately to fuel labor, which is absolutely correct. We also, those of us that have sufficient economic power to partake of the food system in a way, are also exploited by that system. These are some of the symptoms of how we're exploited. We think we're eating. We think we're getting hungry 3 times a day. We think what we want. We eat what the food system provides us, and the food system provides what sells most, and there is the cycle that leads us to where we are. So it wasn't always this way, and I want to tell you the story of how it is that this national enterprise actually began to take us in a different way. When I say that it wasn't always this way, it actually wasn't very long ago. We can actually number the few generations on just one hand. In our families, probably some of you have families that settled in this part of the world and changed the story, but it used to be that we actually devoted the majority of our time to figuring out where our food was going to come from. And it was very specialized in gender, but the entire life cycle was actually defined during the year in terms of how we're going to produce the food, how we're going to process it, how we're going to preserve it, how we're actually going to have enough for the entire year. And that's what began to change when this gentleman, you can tell after many years of experience as a child, as a teenager, at the pointy end of a team of horses and a plow, thought that there's got to be a better way. You know from his writings that this was what was in his mind, and of course it was in the mind of everyone that was going through the very laborious work of agriculture during the 19th century and earlier. So what I want to do is to read you just a few passages here from Lincoln. This could be tedious because this is the sort of stuff that's better read than individually by you than read to you. But I just want to give you a flavor for some of his thinking that made it so that when he got into a position where he could do something about these things, he did, and with a vengeance. And so I won't tell you a whole lot in the interest of the time of the background of this speech. If you're interested, talk to me later and I can tell you the origin. He's speaking to a group of farmers. He's speaking just as he's running his campaign for president. It's up in Wisconsin. It's a state fair. The majority of the population of the country at that time are rural, are farmers, and so this is the audience that he's speaking to. And obviously he's going to speak about farming to a group of farmers. This is the topic of the campaign. And so he says, my first suggestion is an inquiry as to the effect of greater thoroughness, which in our English today we would call efficiency. So the effect of greater thoroughness in all the departments of agriculture than now prevails in the Northwest. I want you to realize that when he's saying these sorts of things, first of all, the Northwest, Wisconsin at that time is the Northwest of the United States. So he's out there pretty much on the border of the nation, the settled border of the nation. But the other thing is, at that time, there is no place that you can go to study agriculture. There is pretty much nobody that knows more other than by age and experience, having done it. So he's talking to a group of these farmers with that background. He says, perhaps I might say in the nation, to speak entirely within bounds, it is known that 50 bushels of wheat or 100 bushels of Indian corn can be produced from 1 acre. Less than a year ago, I saw it stated that a man by extraordinary care and labor had produced of wheat what was equal to 200 bushels from an acre. But take 50 of wheat and 100 of corn to be the possibility, he's seeing the potential, and compare it with the actual crops of the country. Many years ago, I saw it stated in a patent office report that 18 bushels was the average crop throughout the wheat growing region of the United States. And this year, an intelligent farmer of Illinois assured me that he did not believe that the land harvested in that state this season had yielded more than an average of 8 bushels per acre. So this is the period of time that I'm referring to, where things were very different from what I'm referring to as the miracle of modern agriculture, and that the difference between that was human intentionality, the will to set up a system to change things. Now, you saw one indicator there. Let me just read two more and then we'll get on here. Another one, he asked this question: what would be the effect upon the farming interest to push the soil up to something near its full capacity? Unquestionably, it will take more labor to produce 50 bushels from an acre than it will to produce 10 bushels from the same acre. But will it take more labor to produce 50 bushels from 1 acre than from 5? Now, this is an exceedingly interesting paragraph, particularly for an agronomist, and so I'll be disciplined. I won't finish this. I'll just say about this that the reason why I'm sharing this with you is that these are very sophisticated thoughts from somebody walking behind a team of horses, asking himself, how can we do this better? And one last, again, a great amount of locomotion is spared through cultivation. At this time, locomotion means that team of horses. That's the power for the farm. Take 50 bushels of wheat ready for the harvest standing upon a single acre, and it can be harvested in any of the known ways, with less than half the labor which would be required if it were spread over 5 acres. So if you're producing more on less land, the labor that you have will be more productive, is what he is saying. Now then he gets into thinking about the crops that it takes to drive the team of horses and what proportion of what's being produced you're investing in your animal traction and how much you get to take home. To make a long story short, what he does in this stump speech, a political speech for farmers, is basically lay out the blueprint for each one of the 15 or 17 departments that you now find at most land-grant college universities. There's a department that worries just about the entomology of matters. There's one that worries just about the weed control of matters, which, by the way, he speaks with great eloquence here about weed control issues. There's a department that worries just about the efficiency of machinery, the agricultural engineering department, and so on down the line, 15 to 17 typically at most colleges of agriculture. So these things had an origin in terms of thinking about what the specific problems were that needed to be confronted. So as a national project, this was brilliant because you know that Lincoln actually did have an opportunity to do something about this, and When I said with a vengeance, I was not kidding. You all probably know the story, but it doesn't hurt us to actually review it. So when he came into office, he established the Department of Agriculture. So for a nation of farmers, it's remarkable that it took until 1862 to establish this. But here's the reason. The government thought it was taking care of this because the state of the art of agriculture at the time was that farmers exchanged knowledge and seeds. That was the art and practice. You realize I'm generalizing broadly here, but the way that the government took care of their responsibilities here was that over in the patent office, there was literally a file. There was an archive. And an archivist actually recorded all of the different kinds of seeds that were collected in different parts of the country and the world. So they had a record of that so that they could tell you, particular season, particular species, here's what might work. That was the work of the Department of Agriculture up until that period of time. So in 1862, Lincoln establishes that. He establishes what now has become the network throughout the nation of at least one, in many cases more than one, state college of agriculture that performs in the way that I described, where there are specialists in all these different areas of agriculture. And then thirdly, he established the National Academy of Sciences with this particular mission, that when Congress needed to make recommendations, and there was certain knowledge that was required about the best use of public resources, then that there should be a body that took a look at evidence, and on the basis of that evidence, recommended what the best governmental action should be. So this was a busy year, 1862, if you have a grasp of U.S. history, and yet he managed to accomplish these sorts of things. It was also the year that the Welch well was discovered in Pennsylvania. They got the fossil fuel era going. It was also the time when the Transcontinental Railroad was established, and so therefore time disappeared, where that knowledge of steam engines was applied to traction on the farm to try to remove some of the drudgery, where we actually took ice, packed it into some of these railroad cars, and were able to transport perishables, where without understanding the genetics, we were able to domesticate hybrid vigor. Eventually, during the period of the Second World War, all of these branches of knowledge were applied in a global logistical system, which then became the global food system. K-rations, for instance, were the predecessor of the modern fast food system. All of this came together in such a way that some of the war technology became fertilizer technology, some of it became insecticides. And it all came together after the Second War in the particular way that you see here. And it may seem odd to take a look at it this way. If you can't see this in the back of the room, this is a graph of the explosion in productivity of two indicator crops in the United States, corn and soybean. And the reason why these are really two good indicators is that this is, I'm going to really date myself here, this is sort of like the pap that the Starship Enterprise carries in its hull. I don't know how many of you know how the Star Trek Enterprise food replicator works, but it's got this pap in the hull. So when you walk up to the food replicator and you say, I'd like some fried chicken, then this pap, which is formulated by nutritionists to provide everything that human beings need, but it's colorless, bland, flavorless, it gets shaped into that fried chicken, it gets flavorized, texturized, and it gets sent up to the replicator, and then you eat it. You don't know the difference, but it's all pap. So this is the pap for the American food system, the corn and soy, and this is literal. That's not taking liberties with it. And so let's talk about that a little bit here. Because it has a whole lot to do with the impression that many of us have that the moment we start talking about features that the food system has, that we're messing with individual liberty, or that we're talking about the fact that the government should not plan things for its citizens, but that actually everyone should be free to decide for themselves, by God, how we're going to eat. If there's not any freedom that we care about more than that, then, what do we actually care about? This is a map of the distance from any given part of the United States to the nearest McDonald's. As our proxy for the fast food system that we built. And of course, I don't mean necessarily to pick on them, but they are the archetype. Founded in 1955, they are the archetype of the fast food system. There are some of us in this room that remember a world where it didn't exist, it wasn't so prevalent, but here's what it is right now. And here in Manhattan, Kansas, you probably can pick out the little node of light, where McDonald's does feature prominently here, and the closest one is just 5-minute drive north of us here on the corner of Anderson and 113, so we're not very far. And so let's do something that I know all of you are experts on here in order to illustrate the point, and that is let's go to McDonald's. So, you know, and it looks like this, and this is the point I promised you earlier, that I come back and talk about what the food system is actually selling us that we're not paying particular attention to, and that we do need to shift. It's a lesson for the future. So with all of the tremendous productivity in which we've invested as a nation over 150 years, then one of the ways in which we interface with that is like this. And it goes like this. You know, you might be at a meeting like this, and you've got, you know, it's going to be done at 11:30, or you need to leave at 11:30 because you've got another meeting at 12:30. So you're going over to the next town. So all of us will do this kind of calculus. Well, let's see, it's going to take me about 45 minutes to get there. I got to grab a bite someplace. Let's see. I got 20 minutes. 20 minutes is what I got to eat. And so, you know, you're driving down the strip, there are all the places, and McDonald's is one of the signal places that you see in one of these strips. So when you walk, and let's say that you are just bound and determined that you are going to take care of yourself, and you're going to eat well. So first problem is you walked into a McDonald's. Let's just set that aside for a moment, because it was on the way. It was convenient. That was the thing. You know, the food system, here's the thing, it's saving us time. That's the thing that it's telling us. We don't have to worry about anything but what we want. Walk in, get it, eat it, go. That's the thing that it's telling us. That's the thing that the future food system still needs to provide us. So just talk about that here. So you're determined that you're going to do your best. So let me just simulate this, because you all know the experience. Okay, so you walked in, you got to decide what you're going to do. So okay, let's take a look here. Oh, well, looky there. So you can decide what you're going to do, but I'm looking at number 4 here, and the reason that I'm looking at number 4 is that, look, I'm hungry, and that's 2 cheeseburgers. 2 cheeseburgers that I can get for the price of $5.29. Or am I reading that wrong? Oh, looky here. So when you go to McDonald's, there's this marketing scheme, and that is that you can either get the thing that's up there, or you can actually get a meal, the entire thing. So it's the large fries, you know, the large burgers or cheeseburgers, and then they say that the drink is thrown in for free. But that's the meal that you can go and get. So I'm looking at that, but you know, I'm determined that I'm actually going to be healthy. So I walk in there. The fact that I've even walked over here to take a look at this means I'm really disciplined, because, you know, be honest, you're hungry, you walk into a McDonald's, and what do you smell? The fries, the burgers, they just smell so delicious, but you're being disciplined, and so you walk over here to take a look at the salad. So what have we got? And boy, these things are pricey. We got a few salads here. Looks like if I skip the dressing, I could do pretty good on the calories there, but the cheapest one of those is $4.69. And let's see, I need to eat my fruits and vegetables. There's fruits and walnuts there. Maybe I'll sprinkle those on the salad. I can get those for $1.99. Now here's the thing. McDonald's is specialized in the burgers and the fries. They've got that down cold. So the moment you ask for it, theoretically within 60 seconds, that thing is at the counter waiting for you to pick up. That's their business. They have a problem when it comes to salads. And, you know, so if your knowledge of salads is what you experience at places like McDonald's, it's no wonder that they're just not appetizing. You know, because they're chilled, they have to be to preserve them. And typically, in order to make them affordable, you know, there may be some high-quality greens up top, but the heart of it is going to be iceberg lettuce. You know, so bland, flavorless, typically even blanched. And so it's just not very flavorful. You know, chilled salad, you know, it's going to sometimes even hurt your teeth when you try to eat this thing. So you have no idea what it is to, you know, go into a nice, delicious mesclun, you know, with some nice romaine in there, and, you know, fresh berries on it and so on. That's not what we're talking about here. So then, if you still insist on having that kind of salad, when the burgers and the fries are just right over on the other side, you're disciplined. But, you know, let's say that you're trying to do that. So, let me go back over here again. I can get that whole meal for $5.29. So that means the fries, the burger, the drinks, $5.29. And let's do the comparison over here. The cheapest salad is $4.69 plus $1.99 for the fruits and the walnuts. Now, obviously you see what's happening on here. I'm actually being steered in a particular direction. You know, this is not incidental. So let's take a look at a further indicator of that. Here are the drinks. So if I take a look at the drinks, I can get what's called the small there for $1.49. But look, if I spend just 20 cents more, I can get the medium. And if I spend just 20 cents more, which is what the person at the counter is trained to offer you, then you can get a tub. You can get a tub of soda. And you know, so who walks into a McDonald's and asks for a small? You know, you feel like an idiot. Because for just a little bit more, you can have more. It's un-American to ask for a small when you walk into a place like this. So, you know, it's clear that you're being steered in a particular direction. So let's just do the comparison. Like we'll walk in and for $5.29, I can have the 2 cheeseburger meal, fries, and my choice of drink. And, you know, usually that's going to be the tub. Or if you insist that you're going to be healthy there, you can get the Caesar salad. And remember, that's the lowest calories that you can get there. The fruits and walnuts, and you can get water, and that's going to be $8.47. Now, suppose you think I'm sandbagging you. Let's just do away with the fruits and the walnuts. I'm just going to get a salad and a water. $6.48 against $5.29 of a nice, piping, really satisfactory, warm meal. So what am I going to do? Now, and you know what we're going to do in a situation like this most of the time. Now, actually, let me just stop here and talk to you a little bit. Most of you know that the fortunes of McDonald's are actually in peril at the moment. They had these 2 tremendous surges of growth dating back to the 1980s, and they're still trying to keep the last one going here. So beginning around 204, they had a nice little spurt of growth, but for the last 4 years, they've had really tough fortunes. Their market is getting taken away by places like Chipotle's and by places like Panera. And they know this. Their internal surveys show that up to 66% of their customers don't feel good about walking into their place. This is a huge problem for them. And the reason for that is that these customers, when they get asked, say they know that this is not the healthiest food for them. And the word that they use is not fresh. These are customers, unprompted. Where are you here? Do you feel good about this? If you don't feel good about it, why is it? So we're there because we're saving time and we're eating this stuff. So, you know, they've got a problem, and in a way, you know, this is a test of whether the market will respond to what the customers actually want. You feel better about walking into a place like Panera or a place like Chipotle's, even though you're not spending any less. You're probably spending more at a place like Chipotle's to get the equivalent meal. So there's the situation of the system that we've created. Now let's talk about the system that we could create. So there's the problem that we need to overcome. Why can McDonald's do that in terms of the price difference? There's actually lots of reasons, and you know the foremost one. The foremost reason why they can do this is that it really is expensive to keep perishable vegetables in an edible condition for a period of time. So, you know, you need to have the freezers for that and so on. It's just not an easy thing to do. And as I said, they're not as invested in that. So that's not their specialty. They've got a problem if that's the way that the majority of the eating public is going to go. They're attempting to respond to that. But another reason why they can do that has to do with this. So you may be familiar with this. Is what replaced the USDA's dietary recommendations, and it's called My Plate. If you take a look at this recommendation, which comes from convening a panel of the National Academy of Sciences Institute of Medicine. Actually, that process is happening right now. It's coming to a close. There was a meeting yesterday that I need to find out what happened at. And recommendations come out of this that are based on the epidemiology, the medicine, and the science of where the best eating is converging. And if you take a look at this, it's saying a plant-based diet is the most healthful diet. It doesn't say no meat, but it's saying about half of your plate should be fruits and vegetables, a third should be whole grains, and if you're going to eat meat, it should be lean meat. Now, I should also say this is what science looks like after it's been through the sieve of politics. Because the reason that they're not able to say lean meat is that, of course, before the whole process winds to a close, everyone who has a stake in the food system gets a voice, and some voices are very important. And so the issue with specifying a particular kind of meat was just not politically feasible when My Plate was designed. You could not say that, could not steer people to a particular kind of meat. You could not even say lean meat. Protein, we could deal with that, because then people can figure out what they're going to do for protein. So, also, the dairy bit up there, if you go to a more independent source of exactly the same sort of thing, the Harvard School of Public Health, you'll see water up there. So that human beings need. But there's another political aspect of this particular chart. But here's the reason why McDonald's is able, and the whole fast food industry is able to provide for you the price anomalies that we just took a look at, where the anomaly is specifically things that are least processed are the most expensive. It's not a market result. So you take a look at it, it is that when you take a look at where the investments in the Farm Bill, basically what stands for our agricultural and food policy at the moment, you see that it's 80% of that budget that goes to supporting either directly or indirectly by means of insurance, risk management, and so on, the production of corn, soy, that HAP that I described. So 80% of that goes to produce this stuff, which is turned into fast food products, which are therefore lower priced than the market would make them, which then sell because they can be salted, sweetened, and texturized with fat in such a way that they're irresistible. That's actually a slogan of the food industry. You can't eat just one, proud of that. You keep on eating. They formulate things so that you do. So the result of all of this is that, as opposed to the recommendations, one corner of the USDA recommends that you eat according to what you see on the left. The other corner of the USDA is paying the food system so that it produces all of the stuff that is making us sick. And what we do invest in fruits and vegetables is less than 0.5% of Farm Bill expenditures. So there are a few things that need correction here, and so we've done an analysis at UCS where we're basically saying food should be a non-partisan issue. What we've got is a fiscal responsibility thing here. If public resources are going to be expended, they first of all should be expended in the public interest, and secondly, they should be expended in a way that's informed by science. So we've seen what the science recommends. So if you just ask the simple question, what would the structure of agriculture be if we actually supported it in accordance with what the federal dietary guidelines indicate? And when you come up with an analysis like this, it turns out U.S. agriculture is so productive and the land base is so large, it actually could be shifted relatively simply. Now, I say these are words, and so you have to see what you think about this, but over on the left-hand side, you see what it takes to produce what we typically eat, and what things would look like if we actually ate according to dietary recommendations. In other words, if there were flavorful, affordable fruits and vegetables, if they weren't more expensive, if they weren't lower quality, less palatable than all the stuff that is unhealthy, if you could have that kind of a world, then American farmers easily could take care of supplying the additional fruits and vegetables that we would need. By the way, you can find this on our website. It's called Plant to Plate. So if you want to see it in more detail, that's where you can find it. So American farmers easily could grow the additional fruits and vegetables. We would need an additional, if you take a look at the key down at the bottom there, we need an additional few million acres that the Midwest could easily provide. Now, there's many of you in here that are experts in this and don't need to be told this. There has been this tacit agreement, if not collusion, that the country's major fruit and vegetable producers put up with not getting, quote, direct subsidies, and the Midwest farmers do, as long as they don't produce fruits and vegetables in the Midwest and compete with the market of California, Florida, and southern Texas. That's the tacit agreement. So it means if you want to produce fruits and vegetables in the Midwest on a corner of your farm, where literally you could provide bountiful supply, for miles around, of all kinds of summer fruits and vegetables, well, go ahead and do that, but you lose your corn base. You're not going to be having as easy access to credit, although, that's beginning to change. And you will be penalized, at least historically, you would have been penalized in terms of access to risk management, insurance. Now, Jeff Szynski is here talking about the fact that that's beginning to change, and many of us in this room have been working to make sure you don't get dinged because you're trying to do the right thing in terms of both farming as well as in what you're actually producing. But you see, it would take very little land in the Midwest to be able to actually produce the additional fruits and vegetables that we would need. But here's the interesting thing. Our senior economist and our agricultural economist took a look at what the economic consequences would be. This is a win-loss scenario. This is the way economists do their analysis. There would be some people who would lose if we produce more fruits and vegetables, less grain, and less meat. But factoring that in, for what you would get for producing more fruits and vegetables, the net return would be that there'd be 189,000 jobs nationally that don't exist right now if we simply ate
the way that the USDA recommends that we do, and we produce that. And there would be $9.5 billion of increased economic activity as a result of that. These are very conservative estimates. And then, to complete the story, it would take public investment. That we would be investing in food hubs, we would be investing in farmers markets, we would be investing in a lot of infrastructure that would be required. But in order to support that, we would need to invest $90 million as against the $5 billion that we're spending at the moment to support the junk food diet. I want to be very clear, as I said, that there is a role for corn and soy. I'm an agronomist, my specialty is corn. I studied agronomy because I'm in love with the corn plant, but we've produced enough corn. So, this is the story and what it would take. So, when I was at the Kellogg Foundation, one of my major assignments was, I'm probably way over the 10 minutes you told me. Okay, so I'll try to...
questions at lunch, but...
Okay, I'll try to wind this down, Julie. I told Julie she could shut me down whenever she needed me to shut up.
I don't want to shut him down, but we don't want to delay our day.
So when I was at the Kellogg Foundation, we had this chore. It was probably the single most important thing that I did the 6 years that I was there, and that is that we needed to know, for a variety of reasons, what kind of food system we were supporting through our grant making. And this was my responsibility. So because of lack of time, I won't tell you why, but this is what we came up with. We need to be able to measure it, and we came up with 4 different characteristics. It is telling that this characteristic should even need to be specified, but here it is. First of all, good food should be healthy, it should be nourishing, it should be wholesome. You shouldn't fear that you're going to get poisoned or that you're going to get chronic disease, and impair the quality of your life, 1/3 in, and die prematurely 10 to 14 years before your time because of the way in which you ate. So it should be healthy. It should be environmentally benign. It should be green. So remember the not exploiting nature piece, for all the good reasons that Fred talked about yesterday. We're not the only people to live on this planet. And it should be fair. We should be able to eat without causing injustice someplace else. And that is not the case right now. It's not even mid-morning, we've already exploited people elsewhere because of the way in which we eat. There's fruits and vegetables over there. That's why I can say that. And it has to be food that is not precious. If the way that you get to those delicious salads that I described to you is that you have to walk into a hoity-toity restaurant and be able to lay down $50 a meal, that's not what we're talking about here. So it can't be precious food, it needs to be accessible to everyone. So healthy, green, fair, and affordable. Existing simultaneously. You can now get pieces of that, but it's the whole package, all of these things together that we want. So this is what we refer to as good food and what we supported while I was there, and this is what I think we can do together. Now, I know that it can seem like this kind of enterprise. Yeah, right. You're asking all of us to be angels here, and you're asking the government to be fair. And so how is exactly all of this going to happen? And so I could say I'm out of time, and so I'll have to stop there. But instead, I will skip ahead, and I was going to give you some examples of how this is going to begin happening across the country. My shortcut for this is going to be, if you're interested, go to Matt O'Neill's talk here. He's going to tell you about this STRIPS project that Fred alluded to yesterday. One of the many ways in which this is beginning to happen already, in a way which everyone wins. It's not environment versus people or environment versus profit. Everyone wins. I'm going to make you curious, so you just can't resist Matt's talk. They're working on a project where the Iowa Department of Agriculture are just as excited about the work as the practical farmers of Iowa. So go see what I'm going to tell you about that. But this is what all of us can do together. It's basically just put all of our energies into creating the new. And this idea is something that 16 of us came up with when we were teaching an agroecology course when I was at Iowa State, led by Chuck Francis. Many of you know him, just up the road at Lincoln. And there's a citation if you're interested in looking at this. And the latest version of what I'm about to run through really quickly is in Steve Gleason's new book called Agroecology, the 3rd edition, which is going to be out in another month, in December. It should be available. He goes through these 5 steps of agroecology. This first one we're going to dispense with. There's people in the room that are experts in this. Sometimes it gets referred to as the need for sustainable intensification. This is a very deep topic, but I'll just translate it this way. As long as you're going to be farming a piece of land and investing capital resources in order to make that land productive, you've got to make the best use of those resources and waste as few of them as possible by letting them go off the farm or up into the atmosphere. Use them as well on the farm as possible and regeneratively if you can. So this is step number 1. This just stands to reason. This is like competent farming. This is 101. And then the next level of that is, well, you could try to do without inputs that are not necessary, that you have on the farm, or that you could handle the need that the input is helping you deal with through your management, through your sophisticated understanding of the ecology of your farm. You could control insects in this particular way. You could control weeds in this particular way. Yes, more time, that's what I'm saying. Your management, your knowledge. So you could do this, but you know the problem with this, we're all supporters of organic agriculture here, but there is a way in which you could do organic agriculture which is large-scale monocrop, which also requires its own set of expensive inputs, which is not really dealing with profound questions of sustainability, it's just finding a market. So, you know, that's not exactly what we're talking about, but it is better than just the first, you know, input management system that I described. The third level of agroecology is actually saying, I manage an ecological system. And that means that there are a set of niches that I can create on this farm. I will manage those niches. They're underneath the soil, they're on the surface of the soil, they're three-dimensional, there's lots of spaces here, and I'll manage them so that these 6 species are the things that I want to favor, and there are these 10 species that I'm making sure don't have a breathing space on my farm. So that is the third level, very sophisticated level of agroecology at which the STRIPS project is operating at the moment. Now, and actually that is a picture from the STRIPS project. The fourth level is that if you can connect that system directly to people that value that and know exactly what they're buying when they buy that money, you have the imprimatur, you have the economic endorsement. More importantly, economics, you have the feedback loop that conditions what the producer does and what the grower, what the eater wants out of that food system. That's a key thing that doesn't exist in the present food system. There's complete partitioning and isolation so that, you know, just like in our name right now, there are bombs dropping in Afghanistan. You didn't intend to kill anyone innocent this morning. All of us have. In the same way in the food system, you don't intend to do it, but we are enslaving people across the planet to have our chocolate, just one bright example. And we don't intend to do that. And if we knew more, we would have more power in order to direct this system to do the things that we actually do want it to do. And here's the last level. As I said, food should not be partisan, but food is political. For all the reasons we've described, there are public resources going to support a particular model of the agricultural system. And that can change on the rationale that we want the best use of those dollars. So first of all, just on the fiscal conservative viewpoint that we should not waste our dollars. So we should not invest in a system that's wasteful, that makes us sick, that causes us to invest more dollars to maintain chronic disease that we don't need to be paying for because it shouldn't exist to begin with. So there's just that very basic aspect of it. But there's also the